The fifth question about Trump's tax proposals and your retirement future on our list is the one that most of you probably have been asking is what are the implications of proposed tariffs on the economy and retirement savings? So what we'll do is we'll start with the numbers on the Tax Foundation's website. And you've already known, we've talked about it and you've seen that we can see that we're increasing jobs and we're generating revenue for GDP. If you actually keep going, the impact of a universal 20% tariff on all imports plus an additional 50% tariff on imports from China, you can see that that would decrease GDP by over a percent. You can see that it would decrease GNP by over a percent, closer percentage and a half, and we will lose about a million jobs. You can see about 1.1 million jobs is estimated to be lost. Now, I know what you're thinking, like, well, Dre, if that's true, why would anyone do tariffs? And I understand. But you can see, even when you look back to the Great Depression, there were several decisions that were made that negatively impacted our economy and caused the Depression to go deeper and deeper. And one of those was the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930. And it was just the same idea is that we're going to protect American companies. But what I can do for you is that I'll show you with this whiteboard and don't judge me on my handwriting. I know it's not the best, but I'll explain to you why tariffs ultimately end up costing jobs and makes everything relatively expensive. Now, of course, the first position that we normally hear when we're talking about tariffs is why it's necessary. We're trying to bring back American manufacturing, right? Like that high level, what we say is that we're trying to bring back American jobs in the US. But the question becomes, how do you economically do that? Keeping in mind, as we've discussed, everything impacts everything. Everything is connected. So I'll give you an example. Let's say we walked into Walmart and there was a 50-inch TV, right? So we're going to say, here's our 50-inch TV. And this is going to be our TV and it's going to be 50 inches and it's going to be 4K. This TV and this TV would be $1,000. I think we've all kind of been there. We've seen that. And then on the same aisle, there is another 50-inch TV, also 4K. But that TV is $100, right? So which TV would you choose if you went in the store and all the specs generally looked about the same? I think most of us would agree, well, I'm going to choose the $100 TV, which obviously I think most of us would end up doing. Well, you know that this TV is probably made where? It's probably made in the United States. And then this TV is probably made where? It's probably made in China. So now we're talking about US manufacturing, right? So in China, the median income of someone in manufacturing is about 14,000 US dollars per year. So that's why they're able to sell the TV for $100. And so then you would ask me, all right, Dre, well, what is the median manufacturing income that someone would receive in the United States? And I'm glad you asked me. That would be about $35,000. So as you can see, we're almost 3 times the cost for a US manufacturing worker, which then is what shows in the cost. It then increases the cost by a significant amount, which is why US manufacturing is not able to compete on a global scale because the average American expense is much higher, right? That's just apples to apples. So when you talk about tariffs, how does that work? I'm glad you asked. And so we would say, I recognize as long as the TV in China is $100, the US citizens are going to continue buying the Chinese TV. So what we'll do is we'll add a tariff. And so they'll say, how about we add a tariff of $1,000 to the TV from China? And so now when you go into the store, you see a TV for $1,000 and you see a TV for $1,100. Well, now which one are you going to buy? Of course, you're going to buy the US manufactured TV because it's now the cheaper TV. But what was the cost? Well, the cost was now there's no longer a $100 TV available for anyone to buy. Because if you could buy the $100 TV, you would buy it. We all want American manufacturing, but we don't want to pay the cost of an American worker. But everything is connected. So if I add the tariff, it's true that now US manufacturing is on an even playing field is what we'll say, right? We'll say that now it's able to compete and people will be able to buy the TV. But the problem is there's a significant number of people who now can't afford any TV. And so while we added the tariff, which would then make the US manufacturing more competitive, we've now priced out a significant amount of the US employee. So if you think about all the stuff that's basically in Walmart, right? Walmart is a pretty low priced items. You know that you've seen a lot of it's made in like China and Taiwan and other places, the Philippines, where there's not a lot of stuff made in the US because it's really hard to be a low price grocery store and have US manufactured stuff. It is what it is. And so now all of a sudden, everything that you buy as a retiree and just the average American as a whole is now significantly higher. So that's why when you look at the numbers, it says, well, it's going to cost you 1 million jobs. But why would it cost 1 million jobs? It's supposed to bring back US jobs. Because now everything's so expensive, people aren't buying stuff anymore. So now that the costs are so high, most of the time, what are you going to do? You're going to go to your employer and ask for a raise. You're going to be like, hey, look, I can't afford my lifestyle anymore. I can't afford anything. And then your employer is going to be able to give some people a raise, but then they got to cut a significant amount of their workforce because the costs are so much higher for everyone. Because remember, everything is connected. And so when you look at this, how do you bring back American manufacturing? The only thing you can high level do is you could decrease the price of the American product, but that really would require either the government to subsidize them significantly, or that would require us to pay more. And so the government is saying, well, we'll do the tariff, which is paying more, which then will cause people to lose jobs, et cetera, et cetera. You then have to also factor in what the other countries are going to do. The other countries aren't just going to like lay down and allow that to happen because they got to get elected and they have people at home too. So as a result, they impose tariffs back on us. So now all of a sudden we have these trade wars. Now the argument would be, well, Dre, they're not playing fair right now. We have to do something because we're just losing all over the place. And while that might be true in some instances, the question becomes, at what cost are you willing to pay to win? And if you're a retiree, this cost would be your retirement income. You would have to make more to pay more. The tariffs are projected to generate some revenue, and I'll show you that, but you can see that we'll lose about 1.1 million from the US imposed tariffs, and then the partial retaliation tariffs would cost another 362,000 jobs, which would then decrease GDP by about 2%. So the Trump tax proposal right now is he said, I'm going to cut $8 trillion in taxes, but I'm going to raise that through the tariffs to be able to fund it. Well, what we do know is the tax foundation says that the tariffs will probably generate about $5 trillion. So it is true. So we'll cut 8 trillion, we'll raise 5 trillion. So we're talking about adding about 3 trillion onto the overall debt, which is currently 36 trillion. So we'll be closer to $40 trillion in debt if Trump gets all the plans that he wants. But you can see that the cost of the tariff is significant. And because we're in a global economy, everyone actually has a lot more leverage than they used to have. So for example, you've seen China say, if you give us these tariffs you're talking about, we're not going to export chips to the US anymore. You've seen Canada say, well, if you give us these tariffs, we're not going to be sending you the oil that we normally send you through the pipelines anymore because our energy and our chips and manufacturing, everything is connected. And so it then becomes this trade war, and that just exponentially increased cost. And then all of a sudden, even though you have more stuff being manufactured in the US, unfortunately, the higher cost now means that the income that you're receiving, if you're still in the workforce, doesn't cover your lifestyle anymore. And then if you're retired, it's even worse because now all of a sudden it doesn't cover anything that you plan for because all of the costs are significantly higher, which might require us to think very strategically about where we get our items from, or even whether or not we need to kind of go back into the workforce. But you can see that the tariffs would end up offsetting much of Trump's tax proposals, and the benefits that would be generated. The tariffs actually would be a big negative on most of our retirement savings because we haven't even really talked about the market volatility. How do you decide whether it's an American company or foreign company? Because everything's on this global system where it's not all made in the US, that we get parts from this country and it's made over here and brought here and sent there, and then it's maybe assembled in the United States. There's a lot of volatility about how countries will react, how our economy will react. Now, I do think what people will say who are pro on the tariffs, what they'll say is, well, Dre, we have to do something because we're losing all of our jobs. They're not playing fair. So what are you supposed to do? And the question always is, what is the cost of doing it? It's not a question of whether something should or shouldn't be done, at least in my humble opinion. The question is, what is the cost of action versus the cost of inaction? And then you decide what makes the most sense. We can't just say we're just going to do something because something needs to be done. I'm someone who thinks, well, if we're going to do something, what is the cost of that? And what is the cost of not doing anything? Am I able to do a small piece of something? Like, I don't want to just do something on some principle that costs me significantly. I want to do something that makes sense for the American economy as a whole. Understanding it might not benefit everyone because that rarely happens, but understanding what the cost is and if it makes sense for me to do it.